Hello and welcome back. Today I wanted to do a review of the Lord of the Rings inspired lightsabers from Tethan Props. Now Tethan Props is an Etsy vendor, so if you want these things you can find them on Facebook and talk to them on Facebook, but you're going to have to order on Etsy. Before I get into exactly what the sabers are made of and how they work, let me talk a little bit about the history and function of the Tethan Props stuff so that your expectations are set correctly. So Tethan Props is a prop shop. They are designed for, or their items are designed for carrying around at conventions, for using as costume pieces, but mostly for having as collector's items on your shelf. Okay, they are not designed to be dueled with or performed with or even had any sort of light choreography done with them. The reason for that is if you order anything from Tethan Props, these things are made out of rosin. Now I have a piece right here. Okay, so this has very thin walls in a lot of places, but rosin will shatter. All right, so it is not anything that's designed to take a beating. Okay, especially something like the Glamdring model with these with this crossguard. The crossguard, the second that this thing took a shot or you dropped it, this crossguard would break. So these things are props. They are not tools. They are designed to be carried around carefully or left on a shelf, not actually used. Okay, that said, the electronics that you get in these or in his original models were equivalent to that expectation. They lit up. Okay, and as a matter of fact, what he did with his original models was he used a pen light that's rather common in Australia, but not so common in the US. I'll talk about that in just a moment. He used a pen light that he cut the button off of, installed in this lightsaber, and then put a little color filter on there to change the color. So if you got the original models from him, you got a rosin printed, hand painted, weathered, wrapped lightsaber hilt with a cut up pen light and color filters in it. All right, so in terms of people who are used to the lightsaber industry and used to the sorts of things that conventional sabers can do, that sounds really low tech, and it is. But in terms of a prop item that again is designed to be carried around, occasionally lit up, or mostly just left on a shelf, that's all it really needs to do. Right? So there was a lot of demand for these things, I believe. I saw a lot of posts about them out in the lightsaber community, and his page has been pretty popular from what I understand. So a couple of things have happened since then. He stopped selling a lot of those models with that cut-up flashlight in it, and he has started actually retooling these things for use with LGT Saber Cores. So people wanted sound, people wanted features, so he actually increased the size on this model, and the ones that he sells pre-built right now, he sells with these sorts of things in them that have all of the features of an LGT Saber. All right, those are still made of rosin though, so they will light up, they will make sound, you can spin them around carefully. But again, they are not really made for use. Okay, the core of these, as I'll show you in a moment, is PVC. So a couple of the models, like the Gimli model, are a little bit more sound structurally, but still, if you drop it on these corners will chip and crack and the saber itself may shatter. All right, so originally he sold those rosin models with the stunt install. Now he's selling sort of larger models with the LGT core. What he's also doing, though, is he has started selling the 3D files for the sabers that he's not making anymore. And that's what I'm reviewing here today. These sabers that I have here are designed by Tethan Props, but he did not actually make these sabers. He sold the 3D files, and I printed, weathered, painted, installed these sabers myself. All right, so I'm talking about the kits that he has, which are his old models. Okay, so let me go ahead and introduce you to the ones that I have printed. This is a dark Glamdring right here with a burgundy wrap. Okay, stitched up the back. Okay, we've got weathering. We've got runes on there. Okay, there's the pommel. I made a more normal Glamdring as well. Silver with the blue wrap. Okay, again, runes, pommel. This was the first one I made. This was the second. All right, I also have the Gimli model, which I have modified to be sort of a dark Gimli. So my color palette is red and black as opposed to gold and brown. but this is the Gimli Lightsaber. And I have his Legolas model right here. Okay, so in gold and black as opposed to white and gold. So I've taken some liberties with the color scheme on a lot of these things, with the exception of that Glamdring, but that's something that you can do when you have the files yourself and you're making them yourself. All right, so let me talk about those files and what you get when you purchase them. Okay, you get the files to download. You have to have a 3D printer. You can run these on a 3D printer that uses filament extrusion, like ABS plastic. That's a standard 3D printer. You can certainly run these. The dimensions are going to be a little bit more wonky. The detail is going to be a lot less detail, but you can certainly do it. These are mostly designed, though, to be run on resin printers. So resin printers are more expensive. They're a little bit more difficult to deal with insofar as you need gloves and a mask and all kinds of stuff that you don't necessarily need for a standard regular 3D printer. But the detail that you get out of them is a lot higher resolution. All of these little runes and everything right there, you'd be able to see those on a filament printer, but they wouldn't be nearly as clear. And in order to get this smooth finish on here, you'd have to sand and prime the heck out of a standard 3D print. Rosin, it comes out pretty smooth. It comes out pretty high def. All you have to do is give it a quick little sand down, prime it, start painting. Okay, so they're designed to be run on a rosin printer. All right. When you get these, you get all of the files. You also get instructions on how to install the sabers. Now, I would say for anybody buying these things in the US, those instructions are rather hard to follow. All the PVC internals on this, here's a second Legolas I printed. This is a PVC coupler right here. And here's some of the PVC pipe that you use. Okay, but it tells you to use PVC pipe. This, however, is 25 millimeter, and this is a 25 millimeter coupler. Okay, if you're in the US, this can be difficult to obtain. I actually had to order it online because my local hardware store does not carry pipes in metric. All right, so I had to, so it can be a little bit hard to obtain. You got to make certain that you get metric unless you want to sand the crap out of it. If you had a 1-inch PVC pipe, you'd have to sand like a 0.5 millimeter off of all the sides, and then you'd have to sand a little bit further down than that. It would be a lot of work. It would be rather tricky to get the sanding appropriate. So best to just order the pipes that he's designed these things for, which are metric pipes, 25 millimeter. All right, he's also designed it for 25 millimeter blades. That's not as big of an issue. If you have any saber blades from overseas, they're probably that anyways. You might have noticed that some of your saber blades are a little bit narrower than others, especially if you get something from POC Store or LGT. You probably have a metric blade that just for convenience sake is called a 1-inch blade. Okay, so it'll probably fit in this. The little flashlight that he talks about in the instructions, because he actually gives you the instructions on how to take the flashlight and tear it down and create that install that he had on his original series. Those flashlights, they're actually kind of expensive in the US. You can walk into like any hardware store in Australia, from what I understand, and just pick one up for pretty cheap. But if you want to get one in the US, I was finding them for like $30 with $30 to $40 shipping. So it was rather difficult to obtain, and I couldn't find a US equivalent. Okay, the install that I ended up doing on this was just a lithium battery, a switch, and an LED that I picked up. So I put together my own stunt install. Okay, one thing that I would mention though about these, if you're going to be doing an install on this, keep in mind that your space is very, very narrow. Okay, you have that much space to work with. If you can fit your install inside of your saber blade, you're good to go. If you can't, you're going to have a problem. You're going to even have a problem doing anything with an 18650 battery, okay, a standard lightsaber battery. Okay, this barely fits in that tube to begin with. If you put this in a sled or anything other than just wiring it directly, you're not going to have space to insert that battery in there. All right, so you're going to be dealing with very limited space. The Saber Cores, like this, they are not going to work in these things without some significant modification. The sections of this that are designed for the coupler, you'd actually be able to get a Saber Core in there. You'd have to sand down the inside a little bit, but you could wedge the Saber Core in there just by itself. The problem is that it'd be your Saber Core that's holding the whole thing together. All right, imagine this collapsed. Okay, that joint is made out of my Saber Core, which is not ideal. I'm going to be really sort of forcing that thing in and out of there. It's going to damage the Saber Core over time. If you to upsize this in order to make it fit with this Saber Core, so take the whole thing and increase the size so that the internal diameter is going to allow you to have those couplers. You're going to need bigger couplers, but have some sort of tube that this will fit inside that fits inside this. All right, so out of the box or out of the purchase directly, they will not work with an LGT Saber Core. You would need to do some modification on that. The nice thing about the kits is they're fairly inexpensive. I think they were like, I want to say they were around $10 or less. But for that amount, you get the file and you can play around with it. You don't want a regular Gandalf Glamdring saber, you can make yourself a dark one. Okay. You have a problem with some of the files, you can put your own little symbols or something like that set into it with with an AutoCAD program. You can modify the files. All right. In terms of ease of assembly, they're not too bad, but they are difficult. None of the fits are exactly, since it's a 3D print, he's made these fits to be exact. So you're going to have to sand things, you're going to have to force things. It's going to be difficult to get all of this together. So there's a lot of trial and error in getting everything together. Once you can manage to get the saber together structurally, the instructions are fairly easy to follow on how to get through it. Occasionally, though, there are problems with the files themselves, like for instance in this Glamdring file. These two pieces right here come as a separate file from, separate file from the center, which means you have to print these 3 pieces and then glue them together. And the fit right here is really difficult. This was my first try on it, but after a lot of sanding down and messing with this thing, you can still see some of the weld over here. I managed to get it relatively solid without a bump. If you look at his tutorials that he has up on how to actually install these, the Glamdring sabers that he has have this large rise right here, where you can see exactly where the saber has, or the crossguard has joined to the center. With this one, I threw it into an AutoCAD, and I actually joined these pieces in AutoCAD and printed it all as one piece because my printer was large enough to do that. So that worked out a whole lot better. But you can play around with them. There are some problems with the files themselves. There are also places in here that are incredibly thin and delicate to work with until you get the PVC in. And then the whole structure of the thing is basically the PVC. So you have to be a hobbyist, you have to be a 3D printer before this kit is going to really work for you. Otherwise, you can get the finished products, but the price difference is extreme. You got about $10 or so for the files. You go up and get the finished product, you're looking closer to $300, and then you have to pay shipping from Australia. So if you have the ability to do the kits are a good way to go. My understanding is that he's going to start offering printed kits that are uninstalled and unweathered, so he'll print them for you and send them to you, and that might be a good way to keep something like this under budget and still have a little bit of that creative control when it comes to finishing and setting it all up. But so you get the files, you get written instructions. He also has video tutorials up that show you a walkthrough on how he installed it and how he weathered everything. And that was actually a really nice tool to go through. It teaches you a little bit about layering paint to get a good metallic finish. So I highly recommend those, even if you're, even if you don't have this saber. It's a pretty good tutorial on how to weather that he's got up there. All right, so all things told, I'm a big fan of getting the files because I have the capability of printing those things and building them myself. But if you're not into that level of the hobby, you can get them pre-made. Just keep in mind, these are gorgeous sabers, and they definitely make a statement. However, they are not designed for dueling or for use. So if you're thinking that you're going to get something that you're going to take out and swing around, don't. This is to look pretty. This is not to go take or not to go use. Even if you get one of the ones that's installed with a Saber Core, you're still dealing with a resin exterior rather, and it's it's not designed to take any sort of abuse. All right. Hopefully this review has been of use to you guys. If so, join me back for more. I'll see you next time.